Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. Jimmy Fee, Anthony DeCicci, and coming back around for the first repeat guest on the On the Water podcast, Captain Rob Taylor, who was here for our very first one. Rob, welcome back.
Thanks, guys.
And we covered a lot of ground with you last time, but we barely scratched the surface on fishing with
Yeah, I don't
Captain
even
Rob.
remember where we went on that one. I mean, we were a little from fresh, a little from salt. We kind of all over the place.
But the thing that I remember most from that podcast was an ill-advised kind of bet competition that I took. You threw the gauntlet down and said, how about everybody puts in $500 for who in the year 2023 catches the largest largemouth bass?
Yep, we did. We
Yeah.
did.
I didn't even bother bringing my scale like the second half of the season anymore. After he's like, "Oh, I'm up to 7.5."
Yeah, I mean, everyone knew where it was going. You won with how big was that fish?
I think it was 7.5, a little over 7.5 on the jerk bait.
So tell us the story of how you caught that fish. What was the story behind that? And then we can tell the story of our biggest bass from last year.
Yeah, I had been on a pond that I knew had some big bass, and I don't know, the water was colder in the spring for whatever reason. It was definitely a different bite. So instead of throwing the big baits where I would already been throwing HUDs and stuff like that, I had to go and scale back. So I actually was out with Earl, and me and Earl were wading around, and I had actually just pulled the hook on another nice bass. But I had for 2 days, I finally narrowed it on this pattern where they were like the third contour from the bank, so like they hadn't come in yet, right? Because it's a steady sloping pond, so they're sitting in there.
So this was wading, not on a fancy bass boat, 7.5
No.
pounder from shore in your waders.
Yep, yeah, freshwater surf casting. It's the only way to go.
And on a jerk bait, because when we were talking about this, when you made this bet, we were talking wake baits, big baits. We were really
Yes.
excited to do that, and you ended up winning it on a jerk bait, which is something that I really want to get better at fishing jerk baits.
Pattern had changed. You can't force feed them. So they really, it was a, and I actually had to adjust them because instead of like a slow rise, it had to be a slow sink because they were that lethargic. So adding a lead dot onto the 110 just a little bit.
So the Mega Bass Vision 110?
Yep.
Jimmy, that's funny because you and I were gung ho to compete. What were we doing while he was doing that? What were you and I doing, Jim?
So Anthony,
I'm pretty
and I
sure
thought-
you beat the peepers out.
We did.
We were out there. It was early
kicking the
March.
brush.
The first night we went out there, and we caught fish. We were wake baiting at night, and I remember there was a night with ice in the guides, and it was freezing so much, and I couldn't see. I broke the tip off my rod because the thing had frozen. I was taking a crank, and all of a sudden, it snapped like a twig. Like it was that cold of a night where it was icing up so bad you couldn't feel your hands or anything. We caught fish. I think my biggest fish of the year was. I don't think I broke 5 last year. Kind of embarrassingly, but I know you got a really nice one.
I did late
kind
season.
of by not by accident, but it was kind of a random catch. You're one up in Vermont.
Yeah. I mean, I had just come from the Connecticut River where I got an awesome pike on a jerk bait, and it was my biggest by a mile. And then I get up to the hotel. We were going up there for a wedding, and my wife was like, "I'm kind of tired," and I'm like, "Okay, mind if I jump in the lake for a little wade sesh?" And she's like, "No, I saw this point. It looked real juicy. Got in the water before the private property started and worked my way second cast with actually a drop shot, believe it or not. I stuck like probably a 6-pound class largemouth. Didn't have a scale, so we'll never know. But it was one of those big head, big body, right billed fish, and it was awesome."
So, Rob, one thing, this is one of my major freshwater goals for this year is getting better at fishing jerk baits. Give me some advice. How do I get from I catch some fish on it, I don't know, how do I get better at this?
Cadence. And then you have to keep a mental track of your cadence. So when you do get bit, you're repeating the same cadence, right? So it's like, all right, almost like the first time I'm going to go twitch, pause, twitch, pause, and then count your pauses out until you start getting a reaction. I mean, and every day is going to be different.
What's the longest you'll pause it?
Depends. It could be, depending on depth, and 8-10 seconds maybe. Like a good 10-second count, 1,000, 2 1,000. But the other thing I found is like, if the fish are a little bit more active, the slow rise will produce bites. And if you're not getting any bites on the slow rise, find something that'll slow fall. So being able to change the jerk bait, or if it can be straight neutral, that's always good too. But sometimes even the slow fall will outfish a neutrally buoyant jerk bait.
Got it, man. Yeah, I know how deadly it is. It's a numbers bait. It's a quality bait, but it's something you need in your arsenal for ice out. But anyhow, Cheech and I always pay our debts.
Yeah.
This was the most I've ever lost in a fishing tournament. Cheech, we want to pay the man?
Oh, look at...
Yes, specifically for a big effing check.
So we had to give Captain Rob a novelty check. Well, not novelty. There it is.
No, this is what I want right here. This was it.
It's all worth it, dude. Mm-hmm. It's not worth anything. We didn't actually. Don't try to cash it.
Betting against a far superior angler. I am going to put this in the trophy room. Out of all the trophies and big novelty checks, this one may be my favorite.
That's good. I'll make sure Chris has enough money in the account. So, but anyhow, I want to back way back. What we didn't cover last time was, man, how'd you get into this whole fishing thing? Where did it start for you?
Oh, man, if we were to go back to that, it would have been fishing with my father, and a lot of that actually started when I was 3 up at Sebago Lake in Maine. So, started with the freshwater gig, fishing with the old man.
So you guys are from central Massachusetts
So
originally?
we are, yep. And then my grandparents had a cabin on Fry Island, and then eventually my father and my mother got a small place on Fry Island too, just a little A-frame cabin, so that we would go and just fish out of the old sea nymph up at Sebago.
That's awesome.
Yep. In fact, I remember my first big smallmouth, caught it on a live crayfish just outside of Jordan Bay. There's like a little series of like small islands, just crayfish on the bottom.
That's classic, man. I know Kevin Blinkoff is from Buffalo. He used to say that getting the live crayfish, that was what everybody, you could buy them at the tackle shops there, or just go flip rocks and catch them. I've never actually used live crayfish for bait.
I don't know that I have either, successfully anyways, but have you ever fished hellgrammites?
I have not fished hellgrammites. I've heard some good stories about people fishing them, and I have seen them in the wild, but I have never ever fished hellgrammites.
Crazy creature.
Yep. For me, it was either my live bait in the beginning would have been crayfish, obviously the night crawler, and then if we were feeling fancy, it was shiners or smelt.
Like it.
So from there, was your dad a saltwater fisherman too?
He was too. So it started there when I was younger. Then as I got older, I got to go on more of the saltwater trips, and fish out there. In fact, I'll never forget one of my first really big striped bass, which was a 30-pound class striper. I think I was either maybe 11 or 12, and it's right when like my father started really using braided line, because thinner diameter, and we were 3-weighing eels at night in the race, and heavy sinkers. The race rips, and I remember hooking bottom, and I was jammed up, and I wasn't strong enough at the time to break the 65-pound tough line or whatever we had on there. So I'm like, Dad, I'm gonna get spooled. So we switch, and then he'll say I caught his fish, but I didn't want to snag the bottom, so I was burning it up, and as I started burning it up, then I hooked that striper. So he would say that I caught his fish, and I would say we wouldn't have caught the fish if I didn't burn it up to the surface.
And now a note from one of our sponsors who are literally the reason we're able to do this podcast.
This episode of the On the Water podcast is sponsored by our friends at Old Town Canoe and Kayak. I love kayak fishing, and to be honest, there's no place in the world that I would rather be than fishing on my Old Town Big Water pedal kayak. The Old Town Sportsman lineup includes paddle, pedal, and power-driven kayaks in a range of sizes and setups, including Old Town's newest kayak, the ePDL Plus. This is the fishing kayak version of an e-bike. It looks like the regular PDL drive, but it has a lithium battery assist that lets you pedal faster and with less effort. You could choose the level of assistance, or you can even let the battery do all the work and go into cruise control. What I love about fishing from the ePDL Plus is that it greatly expands your options, so you can go further, you can get there faster, and you can explore new waters. As a striper fisherman, it's allowed me to fish outflows in areas with heavy current, the places where stripers feed, and places that I wouldn't have the leg power to fish in a traditional kayak. Old Town kayaks are still manufactured, rigged, and tank tested at the Old Town factory in Maine. Check them out, and I think you'll find that the quality of a Maine-built Old Town kayak can't be beat.
Buzzards Bay Yacht Sales knows that a great boat dealer is as important as a great boat. Why? Because new or used, you're buying a boat with 100 different systems and components that need tuning, training, troubleshooting, and sometimes repair. While most boat dealers are your best friend only until the sale is closed, Buzzards Bay Yacht Sales has developed a bulletproof reputation for building long-term relationships with their customers. Before, during, and most importantly, after the sale. Go ahead, ask around. We challenge you to find anyone who has anything but great things to say about Tom O'Toole and his team. With 6 locations from Freeport, Maine to Jupiter, Florida, including Marblehead, Massachusetts, and 3 offices on Cape Cod, Buzzards Bay Yacht Sales is committed to providing the best possible product, customer service, and support for both recreational boaters and passionate sport fishermen. It's true, who you buy from is as important as what you buy. Visit buzzardsbayyacht.com today.
I heard stories, I think it was Arden Gardell. We were out giant tuna fishing a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And he said he was there when you first really got into surf fishing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So that was when you were in college, right?
College, yep. Yeah, where I started. Well, because he's the one that got me to fish in the wetsuit.
Right. That's what he said,
Right,
yeah.
because he's from New York, and it was much better than what I was doing, which was filling my waders full of water all the time,
And where'd you go to college?
Roger Williams University.
I wish I'd had the foresight to know what I was going to end up doing when I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have chosen a college that was like, that's produced so many fishermen, that college, and you were real close to the water. You could fish constantly. I I was 90 minutes. I was 2 hours from saltwater where I went to college. And so
we actually, even on campus, they had a small pond that was outside of the, I guess it's the aquaculture building now. I mean, it was small, like little. Then they had a few koi in there, and back then you could keep herring. So herring were not illegal to harvest. So we would go and dip net our herring, and then we would keep them in that koi pond. Was our little
Live
bait
well.
pen.
that's incredible.
Bait pen? That's awesome.
So how often were you fishing in college, man?
I don't know if I want to say, but a lot. I spent more time fishing than partying for sure.
That's awesome, man. And so you got out of college and you worked a couple years at the Saltwater Edge, right?
Yep. Did the Saltwater Edge thing, tried the sales rep thing, then went back and in between tree work, and commercial fishing. I did that all the way through, and then decided that I wanted to guide and commercial fish.
That's awesome, man. It's been great. I remember when you graduated to your fiberglass boat, saw the original Real Easy, fished on that one, now fished on the current one several times, and every year it's my favorite trips seem to happen on that boat, man.
Yeah, it was, I think I would say it was like fishing with like Corey Petrazik, Billy Sylvia, BJ Sylvia, Dominic Petraka, because back then, before I was a guide, those guys were all guides, and I was doing mostly the commercial side of rod and reel, and I was like, maybe there's something to this.
So how do you like it? So how do you like taking other people out and having those experiences?
It's awesome.
With them? Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, you've got to be a pretty loyal client. But it's funny, we when we put you on Instagram or on YouTube, on the Water one, there's without question somebody's like, "Oh man, I've got a trip with Robbie coming up," or "I just had an amazing one." I mean, you certainly have a
we
loyal,
have a good time on the
fan base,
Real
man.
Easy. We do have a good time.
What was the first Real Easy? What rig was that?
The first Real Easy was a 28 BHM, so that was the first Real Easy. And then before that, there was the Black Betty, which was a 21-foot Nauset, and then we had a 27-foot Eastern as well.
Nice.
Yep.
So working at the shop, great way to make connections there.
Oh, yeah.
With all the captains, especially one like the Saltwater Edge, which was just a hub of.
Yeah, I mean, we were just die-hard surf casters. I mean, it was surf fishing was an everyday affair. Back in the days of the On the Water Cup, I mean, I was going through like 3 girlfriends a season because they forget who I was. So, because we fished every day. Because I remember talking to people and they'd be like, "Wow, you caught so many big fish during that season," and I'm like, "Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if my average was good because I fished every single night." So,
It's it is true. There's something about that kind of, there are guys who are surgical with it, you know, where like, I know these conditions are going to be my big fish shot. I was like, if I don't go every night, I am not going to catch them. I need to go be there
every night
for the bad and the good. And then like, because there were always nights that surprised you too.
That's right. Nights when it was calm and like, you know, the one point that you haven't checked and you're like, I'll never catch here, but I'm going to go try it. And then it's like, bam, that's where the big one comes from. You know, plus there was always FOMO. You'd just be laying there in bed and be like, what am I missing right now? I could hear them. They were blitzing in the surf. I'm like, ah.
And there's never, even if your buddy went and didn't catch anything, part of you is always like, well, you didn't do this. Like, I would have done it differently and I would have actually caught maybe. You know, there's never a satisfactory missing a night. Like, I never feel good about missing a night, really. So what of all the fish you caught in the surf, you were, man, super serious about surfing. I know you still get out there, but not quite as much.
Not as much.
More on the fiberglass rock now. But what was your most memorable catch out of the surf?
I think my first 40-pound fish was my most memorable because I think that season I was up to like 280 fish over 30 pounds in the surf and not one that was 40 pounds. And I was weighing every single one. I just couldn't break it. It was like a curse. And I thought it's because I had gone from a 30-pound boga and I'd saved up and I bought the 60, and then it was the curse of the 60-pound boga.
That was a thing. I bought my 60-pound boga and somebody said to me, you're never going to top 30 now. Like, now that you did that, you're never going to break 30 pounds.
And it was just maddening. And then finally, you know, got one on a rig deal off Ocean Drive.
So what was that your favorite way to fish, rig deals, you think?
Nah, I liked all of it. You know, it's tough to say what my favorite way is what's working.
Yeah.
You know, because like I like to start off the night just getting bites, whether it's a schoolie or anything. I just like to catch fish. So big fish come, you know, when they come. But I just definitely like to get bites. So I mean, honestly, I think my favorite way to fish is a bucktail. The bite you get on a bucktail, and not like jigging it like you would in the canal, but swimming it, you know, just in the surf and stuff like that is an awesome hit. But, you know, then sometimes it's like the bite on a needlefish is cool too, because they're all different, cool, you know, like the needlefish, it's such a subtle thing and you're connected to it. And when they hit it, you know. I mean, obviously, yeah, we've all had the nights where they tap it and you're like, what the heck? Why is that little tap big? Is it small? Like, what was that? But, you know, anything when they slam it, I guess.
So swimming the bucktail, like you said, you like swimming it as opposed to bouncing bottom in the canal. When that was my first like real surf fishing revelation. I was at Montauk and I had bucktails. Everybody's fishing fishing bucktails there under the light. And to me, I looked at it, and I was coming from freshwater. Like, that was predominantly what I did. Being in Philadelphia, I did a lot of largemouth bass fishing. I looked at the bucktail, I'm like, this is basically a jig and trailer with deer hair instead of the silicone skirts. So I'm bouncing it along the bottom like that, and I'm not doing anything. And then some old guy goes, no. He goes, try this. He goes, as soon as it hits the water, start slowly reeling it in. Give it a twitch every 5 cranks. He goes, you just want to swim it. He said, you don't want to bounce. Don't let jig throw you off in the name of that lure. Right. You want to more swim it. And since then, it's like me. It's probably my favorite. Bucktails and needlefish are my 2 favorite ways to fish.
Yep. Feeling the tension when it's coming in a different position in the waves. You hold up a little bit because you know that it's fluttering. Then as it comes down the face, you got to speed it back up a little bit.
But I know one of your biggest surf bass was on a darter.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Actually, it was. And it was actually on the darter, then off the darter, then back on the darter. I mean, that is the craziest thing. Yeah, that 52-pounder was like...
It ate twice?
51. So what happened was, when I was fighting it, I felt this all of a sudden. The rod was loaded up, and the rod became violently unloaded and then reloaded. And then the fight was back on. And then as I landed the fish, when I reached down and I grabbed him on the side of his mouth, I got stabbed by something. And I was like, oh, and then I repositioned it under the jaw, pulled it up. When I put my light in and I wanted to see what stabbed me, it was the hook, part of the treble hook on the VMC where it's welded on, broke off in the fight. And then it was hooked completely on the opposite side of his face.
That's
so
crazy.
When the hook parted, luckily, when he shook his head, it came off and then rehooked on the inside of his mouth.
That fish was meant to be, man. I think
it was meant to be. Yep.
It's funny. It's as many ways as you can lose them. You know, just to have one hang on like that, that's pretty That's pretty cool. But these days, your season starts in the boat. We caught our first migratory stripers together last year, I think.
Yeah,
remember we were out
that's right.
tog fishing with BJ.
Yeah, remember we had to scurry through his boat because he had nothing. I mean, the plan was to go out and catch some tog and, do
Which
the
we
shakedown
did.
crows, which we did. We got some nice tog. But then all those stripers, I mean, they were already like 30 class inch, 30, 33 inch class stripers blitzing on top on small herring.
So it was the end of April. We went out there. We had a great day of fishing, tog fishing, bounced around. I caught my biggest ever tog.
How big was that, Jim?
9.5 pounds.
All right.
So
Just making sure it wasn't 10 yet.
I'm getting ever closer to the double-digit tog, and I don't want it just to happen that fast. We had a great day, lots of fish, and you guys. It was kind of your like pre-trip. You're like, okay, making sure they're here, and you guys. I think I kept a couple deep, but you guys put them all back. You're like, no, this is my bread and butter for the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, and I still, I knew we were going to be back out, so if I needed some fish to eat, I was working off the last of my sea bass supply anyway.
So we're running up the bay and then see a giant flock of birds. And that time of year could be, my first thought for that early in the season is they're over sea ducks. Because how often do you see them and they're diving on cormorants or sea ducks early in the season? It's not actually fish. But we get a little closer and all of a sudden you see some big bait spraying. And there was, nobody had been talking about striped bass that size yet. And we found, like 100-yard long school of them making their way. They must have been in on that tide.
Yep. Yeah, they probably came in on that tide, but because that tide came in, so we were actually just probably following them in that whole time, and we finally caught up to them when we came around the other side.
And it was that classic scramble where B just like, I've got this here I forgot about this one last year when I went to clean the boat. So here's this random topwater, here's a tuna popper, and like whatever
Did
you
find
can throw
something
into
in the
the
bilge?
Yeah, I dug up a dock like way in the depths of his boat. I was like, I know there's one in here somewhere.
And they ate it. We caught a few of them, and then they kind of dispersed a bit, and we called it a day.
That was it.
That's one of the worst feelings when you're like, you encounter something unexpected and you just don't have what you would normally have if it was.
Oh, dude! I remember like
part
one
of the menu.
The early times surf fishing, and then I was actually fishing for tog on shore. So all I had was hooks, weights, crabs, and some albies popped up because it was late in the season. It's August when it reopened up. So I remember cutting up my Stop and Shop card. I cut my Stop and Shop card in half, put it on a hook and on my three-way, and I was casting the three-way out and trying to burn it through, and I actually caught an albie on a piece of a Stop and Shop card.
It is true, and like I was always the guy that when I was a kid growing up, like I would see that enough. I'd be like, I wasn't prepared for this. So eventually, I got to a point where I had the biggest tackle box that they bought. The thing weighed like 40 pounds. Where it was a giant Plano box, and it had trays full of everything. So at any one time, it was like, here's my fluke rigs, here's my albie stuff, and I would cart this up and down jetties. And to this day, I'm not really like a minimalist. There are guys that go surf fishing. They've got a 3-tube bag on their belt. I've got my 6-tube bag that we put out a video on.
Jammed in there.
Me surf fishing in New Jersey, and I had this giant plug bag, and people are ripping on me on in the comments section. They're like, you caught 2 fish, and you had 50 plugs with you.
You had extra tubes attached to your bag.
Hey,
I did, yeah.
But I know how that is. Like, I started with the double row bag because, and a lot of that too was I had a double row bag because my session would start. I'd start fishing at noontime, so I got stuff that I'm fishing all daytime, and then it would progress to night. So we had to have everything packed. But then it goes down to a single row. You figure out what you like and what you don't.
You figure you get an idea of what you need, and then also you get better at fishing the main lures too, where with a bucktail jig or a needlefish, even as the conditions change, I feel like I can adjust that presentation enough to catch the fish on it. Right. I don't necessarily. If you're catching them on darters, I bet I can still catch one on a needlefish. So it's that type of thing you get where you can
sometimes better as the tide slows. Sometimes better.
You and I are pretty bad at being minimalists. We tend to pack for every conceivable scenario that we can conjure up in our minds.
There was one trip Rob and I took years ago where I was kind of unintentionally minimalist, where he's like, you get the eels. Like I'm working late. I can't get there in time. You have to get the eels. But if we get eels, we're going to catch giant fish. And then we had to take just a classic Rob swim where I'm like where I hit the halfway point. So we had to swim to this rock. And it was one of those where I'm exhausted and I'm thinking like, I'm almost more than halfway. So if I need to abort and head back, and this is the time to do it, otherwise I'm not going to be able to make it. So I make it out to the rock. We run across, and before we had to get to a different angle, and a wave like took you out.
Yeah,
a wave blasts you off the rock, and it's just me. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I hope he comes back.
Yep. Always find my way back.
So you came back, and they're like, all right, where are the eels? And I had them in a mesh pouch on my belt. And one had like wriggled out, opened up, and we had 0 eels. Mm-hmm. And I think we each had like 2 bucktails as backups, but the plan was always eels. And I was so bummed. I had one. I think there was one left. And I was like, here, like I feel bad. You take the eel. You take the single eel. Since then, I've moved up to the giant jugs with eels, and they're
foolproof.
Exactly. Yes, foolproof
and buoyant, like a little floaty.
So that was a big learning moment. I was so bummed because you're like, there's big fish here. I know we're going to get them. We just need eels, and that was I lost them in my panicked swim across the
those
English
little
Channel there.
Short trips where you're kind of forced to be a minimalist. I think that's where you get the most strides in like figuring out like, all right, I got nothing but jerk baits with me on this trip or something like that. I'm going to get this dialed in because that's all I have to fish. And I think that forces you to kind of figure out.
Yeah, if you're trying to get into something, for sure. I mean, that's even like, just like you said, swim baits. When you're getting into swim bait fishing, it's so hard to really get the confidence in it if you've never used them, right? Because if you have both rods, you're like, 15 minutes goes by, you haven't got a bite, it's easy to pick up a shaky head or something like that, and then, you're going to catch on that. Where sometimes if you just bring the swim baits, you really force yourself. And then once you get one bite, you can get a million bites, right? It's just what you have confidence in. I mean, that's rule number 1 in fishing too, is like sometimes if the bite is very good, especially in the saltwater, like in the surf or something like that, now's the time to experiment and take the other lures out that you may or may not have confidence with and try to, get bites on that. Because the fish are there. The time not to experiment is on a slow night when you're not sure what's in front of you. And if there's just no fish in the area and you're cycling through lures, then, they might get put away forever and be like, these don't work.
Yeah, you're blaming lure when it could just be a lack of fish in front of you. If you're catching them every cast on darters and you're thinking, I'd like to learn how to fish a bottle plug, or I'd like to learn how to fish a needlefish. That's when you do it.
Even like the vertical jig bite, right? That's when I like to experiment with colors sometimes when, I'm crushed them on the green and it's like, all right, well, I already got one on this, and like everyone's hooked one. Like let's try silver, pink. Let's see is color making a difference. Sometimes actually it is, and then it's like, wow, a bunch of times I've had retrieves through the fish, didn't get bite. Let me switch back to this color, and then other times it's just wide open and they'll eat everything.
And on our day last summer, one of the things that you'd figured out at that point by mixing and matching the colors was that the yellowfin had a preference for pink.
They did.
While the bluefin were really dialed in on the green.
Which is crazy to me, but that's just, when you're keeping tally of the clickers, how many is getting caught on each, you could see the uptick on the pink and the yellowfin.
So what's the spring striper bite like in Narragansett Bay these days? It's
been good.
Yep.
It's been good. I mean, bunker. Yeah, top water. I mean, I've been messing around a little bit with some cool stuff with live imaging. I mean, that's like the topic these days is forward-facing sonar, and you see it in the freshwater world. Guys, some guys are like, that you shouldn't be using forward-facing sonar in bass fishing. It's taking the fishing out of it. But I think it's just another tool. But, I mean, I think it's cool because now I can pop it, take Mega Live, put it in landscape mode, and you can see your bunker swimming behind the boat. So now what I found
So you've been applying it to saltwater already?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm waiting. I got to get a better mount, and we're going to use it chunking with tuna. I think that's going to be the next thing. It'll be awesome.
That would be amazing to see that.
But you put it in landscape mode when you're trolling, slow trolling bunker, and you can see the bunker, and then you can see the fish as they come in to the field of view on the bunker, whether it's a single. Generally, if it's smaller fish, it's going to be a small bluefish. You can kind of tell. But the thing I found is if you have multiple fish come in on the bunker before they even blow up on the bunker, but you see them coming in, so they come into the field of view, you can fire a dock or top water in that direction over the bunker, work it through, and now you're going to add not just one fish, but maybe 2. You double up, you know what I mean? So
that competition, that is a common theme that we've talked about with your fishing. What you just sent me a video of you smallmouth bass fishing a couple days ago through the ice, and there were multiple fish on the screen. You go, oh, competition. That's always...
That was FaceTime.
Well, it was FaceTime with him.
Yeah.
I was...
Yeah, you didn't answer.
I was like wrist deep in a dirty diaper, so
Yep,
a
that's true.
baby's not mine.
Yep.
There's just got to be a better way to say that.
Yeah,
So
that is true,
competition.
competition.
And have you been using the planer still for the?
So I have definitely still experimenting with the planers. You know, it's tough because the weight of the bunker on the planer is heavy, so I got to kind of find the right ones. But I do like how it increases the spread, right? And then, you know, now it's just a question of separate rod for the planer or just do it inline, because inline has its advantages versus having one separate on its own rod. Then the line releases from that planer. So, yeah, still trying to figure that out. I mean, because it's amazing how, you know, a lot of the guys, especially down south, I mean, I see things from like Chuck Timon or whatever. I mean, he catches massive fish, and his spread is incredible, right?
I mean, 12 to 18 eels at a time.
So, and a lot of times in the spring when we're fishing mudflats, we need to cover water. So I think having that spread and having more of a footprint helps when you do come across a few bass, because, you know, sometimes we have big schools, as you've seen. When we were live chumming that day, we were actually on our way out. Remember, we were leaving, and we saw those things when I was going about 15 knots, and that was a big enough school. But, you know, I think picking off some of those 2 to 3 size fish pods where there's only 2 to 3 bigger fish, having that wide spread that means that you at least can present a bait to them.
You can get it to them in time before they're out of range.
Go out. Yeah, exactly.
So once, one last question about the bunker. What circle hook you like these days for them?
Anything that's got a really wide gap. So I've been experimenting with some mustads, some owners. I do like the owner makes a inline tournament grade 1, so it's not offset, but it has a very wide gap. It almost looks goofy because it's kind of big, but when you're slow trolling a bunker and you're pulling them, the weight of the hook and the size doesn't affect it as much because you're pulling the bunker forward from the hooks. So, you know, he's getting dragged essentially anyway, so he's just keeping up. It's not, you know, I'm not letting him free swim. And that wider gap is just the increase in successful hookup ratio with that circle. You know, and they're laser sharp, those hooks.
Now, is it a 8-0, 10-0?
Oh, it's a 10-0.
Yeah. Oh, that's a big hook.
Big. That's what I mean. It looks goofy, but look, I don't think it doesn't affect the action on the bunker, and it when they come and they swallow them whole, I mean, it's getting around the jaw. You know what I mean? And it's funny. It's still successful. Even like a 28-inch striper on a really big bunker, sometimes they have a hard time eating it. So you'll watch them hit it a few times before they actually target it and get it head first. But when they do, that hook still works even on smaller fish but when you get like, I mean, a 30+ pound fish, it vacuums. That bunker's gone. So that hook is going all the way around the jaw. I mean, you got them.
And you're hooking them through the nose, or are you still bridling them?
Still bridling them.
Yeah, okay.
You know, unless it's in a pinch. Sometimes if I already know I want to get a bait out quick, and, you know, I won't spend the time to bridle it. I'll hook it through a nostril, just get it out there. It doesn't have to be pretty when the action's hot. You know what I mean? Just make it happen. Get it out there.
So eventually you get to a point in the summer where those fish that were in eating the bunker in Narragansett Bay kind of push out front to the ocean. Yep. How do your tactics change then?
I mean, if I can still get bunker and it's available, I love to bring it with me. But then we're going to fish with eels. We'll start trolling the tube. Jigging bunker spoons, actually. Well, not bunker spoons, but flutter spoons. That's been huge. I mean, honestly, sometimes there's days where it's like I don't even bother with the bunker because I know that the flutter spoon just crushes.
What's been your approach when it's like I'm going to the bunker spoon? Like, what's your program like? The flutter spoon.
I mean, I always have them, so it just depends on like how the fish are behaving. But like, if you're marking them and stuff like that and you got a nice wind, pop a drift, and it's just fun because, it's a little bit, and I'll always have them with me because sometimes you slow troll for a while. If it's effective, it's super fun. When it's slow, then I want to switch it up and, let the anglers be the one imparting the action and stuff like that.
How do you coach them up on presenting the spoon?
I just kind of say snap it and let it fall and let them kind of do their own thing and find their way into it, because if I would tell them exactly how to do it, how I would do it, and then sometimes they're not doing it that way, but they're still catching. So it's more about I'll see how they're working it, see if it's working. Mm-hmm. I mean, because the other thing I found with the spoon is, as much as it's great for snapping it, if I got a nice drift and you cast it downwind and give it a count and burn it back straight, just a straight retrieve, that gets smashed a lot.
Really?
A lot. I mean, even to the point where when I was surf fishing, we had like a horrendous east blow. I think it was blowing east for like, I don't know. I was trying to get you to come down and surf fish. I was like, dude, it's going off like every single day.
Was this a couple years ago in October?
That was this year.
Okay.
It was like, and I brought, and because of the east wind where we were fishing, I just happened to be fishing Ocean Drive. I could bomb the flutter spoon out behind me, and dude, burning that thing through in the surf. I mean, trust me, it's not a go-to surf lure, but they were crushing it.
That's cool.
Crushing it.
That's awesome, man.
And there was like, you almost couldn't go too fast. Like it was like, stripers don't swim this fast. Yes, they do. But I kind of stole that too, because I was watching you film that show with Rob Radloff, and when he fishes those big woods, he's got speed.
He's cranking them.
Tranks that's fast, so that thing is moving. So it'll get those reaction bites. So yeah, the flutter spoon can be jigged, cast. I mean, and then I like big tsunami shads. Just fishing them erratic.
I used to fish those real big ones that they made with the double hook, under, working birds, and just slow roll it under the school of mostly schoolies, and usually pluck a bigger fish out. Mm-hmm. But those things didn't track all that well unless you were super slow.
Yeah, I like the big ones with the single hook. It almost looks like a shark hook.
Yeah,
they've got
and I like a very erratic, like super fast, slow it down, let it fall, burn it. Very, very erratic.
Now with the eel fishing, one thing that I know you've got super clear water out there. Mm-hmm. You'll scale down your leader quite a bit, right?
Sometimes I will. Yep, I will scale the leader down. It does help in the clear water, and I think it helps just get the eel down. We switched over, using some of the new thinner fluorocarbons definitely helps too.
Like which ones?
Premier, just because the diameter, and it seems to sink at like a little bit better of a rate, And I will scale down on occasion. That definitely helps,
And it hasn't hurt the size of the fish you caught. Was that the biggest bass that's ever been on the Reel Easy? You guys caught this, what was it, 4th of July?
Yeah, 4th of July. Yeah, it was massive. And we had actually gotten a 60-pound fish a few days before we got that really big one. And then BJ got one. We were fishing. We were working the same school of fish. We had this pattern where we knew that in the middle of nowhere, very flat bottom, but on side scan, we would pick off, you'd see 8 marks that literally were on the bottom and were super big. I mean, you could tell. And it was odd. It was not only was it stripers, but it was some of the biggest smooth dogfish mixed in that I've ever caught. To the point where they would actually fool you. You would think you had a big striper. And I mean like smooth dogfish that are like, at first I actually thought it was brown sharks because it was I was like, I've never seen a dogfish this big.
I've seen smooth dogs and bass run together.
And they were mixed together, and they were just not on any structure, just in a flat, and just, always running around, having side scan going to or fro. It's like, oh, those look like marks. Slow down, double back. And my 2 60s, BJ caught one and did not have a scale that day, and he was right next to me, and it looked pushing 70. I mean, probably one of the biggest stripers I've personally ever laid eyes on, and he's just a boat length away from me. We're right next in earshot. I'm looking at this thing, and it was a barrel. And they were all that classic, way big underbite, just like a different size class of fish. I mean, the fish that we caught in that, like, they were around for about a week and 5 days, and they were just different different size class.
Were they on bait or were they just kind of...
They were just there. They were definitely eating something, but I don't know if it's that they were using that spot during the day to stage and then at night feeding, because they were definitely all pretty well fed. But, I mean, they were the type of stripers that would just corral a school of tautog or sea bass and eat them. You know, they eat small cormorants and small children that are swimming. They were that size fish, you know, and we were getting them on live eels, and you could pull a tube and catch them on the tube.
So your live eel setup there, what's the tackle look like?
I like it super light. You know, I like to light action rod. You know, absorbs a lot of the head shakes, helps keep the fish pinned, and I mean, you don't need super heavy line unless you know you have a lot of current and your feet are stuck on the ground and there's boulders everywhere, right? Surf fishing, you wouldn't use the same setup I'm using from a boat, but boat, very maneuverable. It's easy for me to track one down with the trolling motor, no problem. So what I found is that like some of the lighter action rods, like whether we're using like a Nexus or 150 gram Black Widow, something like that.
Yeah, made by Jigging World.
Even with the light line and leader, you can apply a lot of pressure by letting the rod bend, right? Because that is where you get all of that line. So, I mean, the setups are very light. You can fish with them all day, you know. So I like that VSX 50, I think, paired with 20-pound braid. And, you know, I'll use anywhere from like 30 to, 50-pound fluoro.
Now, are you any weight on that or no?
Sometimes weight. Just depends on how you can present the eel, right? Eels presented with no weight are pretty natural looking, but sometimes it's just your drift and everything. A weight is better. So it just, that's a lot of condition, tide dependent, stuff like that.
So that real big one, what, replay that for us, man. What was that?
I knew when he set up on it, they do like this thing where I'll know initially when you set up on the fish how big it is by the head shakes and the rod, like a 20-pounder, you get that wave, the 20-pounder's like, hey, how you doing? 30-pounder gets a little deeper. And then anything that's like 40 or over, it's just the big, I mean, like the head shakes make the rod tip sway back like 4 or 5 feet. And I'm just seeing this rod buck and I'm like, and we because we already knew, what fish size class fish were in the area. And I think actually I had beefed up in the fluorocarbon department. I went a little bit heavier just because, we just knew that they were monsters. And I was like, all right, here you go. I was like, lean back on the fish. I put pressure and try to slow him down. But, he was a freshwater angler also. And he finessed it just right because the leader was compromised. Because I think that he had actually hooked up to a bluefish and he had put his own eel back on and let it back down, and I didn't check it. We're normally after someone, but I was like, we were on the fish, so I wanted everything to happen quickly, so he just did it. And I'm pretty sure if anyone else had hooked the fish other than him, probably would have lost it because, you would have thought he was fishing like a net. It was just perfect, and when it came up, I was like, I got a big net. I don't know if that's going to fit in the net.
Damn.
That was a common theme of the last podcast is you had a lot of fish that got away source to the point where you jumped off the boat to try to wrangle one that got away right next to the boat. But, it sounds like things have been falling in your favor a little bit more lately. Yep. And
so we did a quick hanging weight, I already know. We tear the net out, just weight it in the net. So it's cradled, did it, handed it back to fish. His daughter took a quick photo, put it back in, thing swam away. Hopefully I'll catch it this year. That's
awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, you've seen some monster fish the last couple of years, seeing plenty of big fish off Rhode Island, so that's good to see, man. Yep. It's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, between there and Block, I'm surprised someone could catch a fish in that 70-pound class somewhere between, Newport and Block Island in the next year. I mean, even some of the fish I've seen come out at Block are, we did one trip coming in from tuna fishing where we stopped on the ledge just to do some daytime striper fishing because we burn out from catching tuna. And I couldn't believe it. I think every fish we caught was over 40 pounds, during the day. And we weren't, I didn't even have eels. We were just slow rolling the Ronzi paddle tails. They were crushing them.
So one thing you said about the flutter spoons, it reminded me of our trip with Chris Megan last summer, where we were out. We filmed Jigging Tuna with Rob out south of the Vineyard, where there was tremendous tuna bite for, the better chunk of the summer.
Yeah.
And what you said about the flutter spoons just a couple minutes ago is you let the customers figure it out for their own. They do their own thing. You don't, give them you don't tell them too much what to do. Let them
you gotta,
feel it out.
I got to coach a little, but they have to be comfortable with how the style they're manipulating the jig or flutter spoon.
So if you were going to tell someone how to work a vertical jig, the advice you give wouldn't be what Chris was doing, but it was working tremendously. Chris was letting the jig. So what you'd said early in the trip, you're like, these things are grub and sand eels on the bottom. And Chris took that and he thought, okay, I'm going to keep my jig in the mud.
And that had actually worked a week prior to that, where we had a day where it wasn't about jigging the jig. It was about keeping the jig in the sand.
And it was some of the most frustrating fishing I'd ever encountered.
I missed that one.
Because
yeah, when Chris went up 4-0 on you, you started to sweat.
I'm there. If there was an article on how to jig for bluefin tuna with metal jigs, like I was doing it, I was taking the textbook approach, one lift of the rod for every turn of the reel. It was the sandiest sand eel that anyone ever saw. That's what my jig was doing. Chris was basically his cadence looked more like fluke fishing, where he was basically like slow lifts, just letting that thing just kind of flutter along. And he kept hooking fish. And he did this thing, and he always...
But remember, we switched the rod on him because his jigging cadence with that rod, the tip actually helps swing the jig up perfectly.
You had a slow pitch rod on board. At the beginning of the day, you go, here are the classic kind of fast pitch speed jigging rods. And then here's a slow pitch one. It was the Jigging World Luminous series, and they have a slow pitch one as well. And you go, if we want to have some fun, here's that one. So Chris tried that. I think he caught did he catch the first fish on the slow pitch? And then I took it from him, and then he caught several more. He caught a couple more on the high pitch. Then I swapped back, and he took that and caught another one on the slow pitch, all before I hooked one. And it was it was tough. It was tough to be Jim for a while.
I could see your face. I love that face.
You just can't. You know what? It's like golf. It's just you against the fish. It's not you against somebody else, or you'll get so psyched out.
The insult to injury of the whole thing was I'm jigging away, and Rob goes, "Whoa, look at that whale!" And I take my head away and look, and you did the classic like prank where you whack the butt of the rod so it feels like I got a bite. And I go, oh, and then I look, and you're laughing. In that same moment, Chris hooks up, and I was like, "This just isn't going to be my day." But it did end up being my. Like we evened out at the end.
It ended up being everybody's day.
It was everybody's day. That was incredible, and we were outside the main fleet a lot. But I'm sure by design. But you were
just follow the fish.
If you're in a when you're in a center console out there, you're thinking fast fish. I've got to get on them quick. I've got to move. And that's not the approach you take. I mean, one, in your boat, you're not going to take that approach.
No.
But two, you slow down and you take everything in. You're looking
you go too fast, you're going to drive over the fish and you're going to miss them, right? Yeah. On your way to the spot, you got to make sure, you're going over all the other spots. So you got to pay attention.
So of all the things, I learned a ton on that trip. But the main one, my main takeaway that I'm going to take with me on every offshore trip from here on out is the size of the slicks. Mm-hmm. So you think bigger's better. A bigger slick means more fish. What's
That's a slick that's old.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to get the little one as it's forming.
So when we're saying slicks, we mean if you look at it, it looks like kind of an oil slick. And what that is the oils from the bait fish the tuna are feeding on below float to the surface, and they create kind of a flat, glassy appearance on the surface of the water. And if you find that, a lot of times it's an indication there are fish feeding below. And I was always of the impression, here's a giant slick. There must be something crazy going on there, but that's not what you want. You said, no, I want to find a small slick because that's a new one.
Right, and you saw as the ones that we pull up to, they started small, then they would grow, and then after they got big, then we would go and have to find another one because they were moving those fish on those pockets of sand eels.
And if you were running too fast, you would miss those smaller slicks a lot of times. And that's something where you're running, you're constantly looking, just as you're moving around, like it's...
Looking and smelling, because you could smell them too.
Yeah. And the shearwaters are no, not the shearwaters. The storm petrels are the tuna chicks. They go and they feed on those oils. So those two together is kind of a great subtle sign that's easy to miss when finding fish, especially to jig.
Oh yeah,
because we didn't see any fish on the surface.
Just in the morning when we first pulled up, we did have a few look like smaller yellowfin that were on there, because I remember you and Chris instantly went to the popper, and then when we started marking them on the bottom, I think I got hit and I think I had missed one. Everybody changed and went back to the jig rod.
The reason I so desperately wanted one on a popper was the day before I was out with Cheech, and he caught one on the popper, and I hadn't caught. I've never caught a tuna on a popper, and I'm like, oh, I gotta get one. And I ended up catching a ton on jigs that day. We both had drive-bys on poppers though that day.
Yep, yeah, boiled right in the first thing. I mean, I was actually surprised you guys didn't get tight on the popper.
But man, I've said this. I love the jig bite so much better than the topwater bite. I love, because you're constantly fishing. You've got a line in the water the whole time. I'll take a jig day of tuna over the topwater.
I like just watching the jigs come up through the water column and watching the electronics and just being able to see the fish as it's coming up and know you're going to get bit.
I keep going back and forth, and I've come to the realization that I just like hooking tuna.
That's right.
Right?
It's true.
But the jig bite is like a car accident. You know, if you're speed jigging, it's so aggressive, and you feel it way more than any topwater bite, whether you're throwing a stick bait or a popper. But there's something exponentially different about hooking them on a popper and getting that visual treat of it just leaving a hole.
Put it this way.
Or airing out.
None of us want to choose which one. We like them both.
Yeah. That's why when you've jigged 20-something on a trip with you, it's like, I only want to throw a popper now. Mm-hmm. So I get it.
So early indications out. Right now it's the end of February, and when we were talking the other day, you were already excited about the prospects for this tuna season. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, you got lots of things right there. That you already got a nice little pack of yellowfin staged off the Carolinas. You know, the water, the way it seems to be shaping up, it looks like it would be good for southern New England. You know, New York, Rhode Island. You know, just watching those eddies, and you know, you just gotta look at it every day. Just every day, watch that water. You know, I mean, obviously it's going to be what it's going to be when the boat goes in, and it's just.
I mean, we're 3.5 months away from the tuna fishing, and you're already looking at the reports, looking at the Gulf Stream. I love that, man.
You gotta keep your finger on the pulse as it comes up. You know what I mean? So
have you ever looked at any of that, like forecasting data that like Ross puts out, where it's like
they do a very good job.
They map out the whole upcoming year of what they predict that water to do.
I don't look at the Ross stuff like as of right now, but you know, if we're fishing like a tournament or something like that, like when I fished the Tri-State, you know, we'll utilize some of the Ross stuff just knowing where. I mean,
I came across that for the first time, and I didn't realize that they had models that were predictive.
Yeah, I mean, they have
this far in advance.
They have analysts so that are always looking at the water and looking at the trends and everything. I mean, you know, and then once you get the hang of it, I mean, you can do a lot of it on your own, you know, depending on what subscription you apply to. But, you know, that's a lot. That definitely is indicative of like the blue water fishery when you're looking for your yellowfin, marlin, stuff like that, because it is hard to use the sea surface temps and the chlorophyll to a degree when it comes to bluefin, because bluefin, unlike yellowfin, can go wherever they want, right? So that you still can use it, and it still I still apply a lot of stuff to the bluefin fishery that we have, but that being said, you know, it's like the bluefin could be inshore or offshore in a matter of a day, and you know, when it comes to water temperature, be damned, they don't seem to care. They just want to eat, and eat.
Mm-hmm. Now, the mixing of the bluefin and yellowfin that we saw out there last year, how did that kind of ebb and flow throughout the season? Were there days you only caught yellowfin, or were they segregating at all, or?
It depends. I mean, obviously, if you got into like a cooler section of water, there would be a downtick in the yellowfin versus the bluefin. But when the water was pretty stable and it was almost like this mush water that came from the edge all the way in, you had a mixed bag. So they were all kind of congregated together.
The one thing I noted on our day was there were 2 double ups, and both times it was the same species. So we doubled up once. It was me and Tristan doubled up on bluefin, and then me and Chris doubled up on yellowfin. And it did seem to kind of trend in that direction, where like you'd get a couple
birds
bluefin.
Birds of a feather fly together, you know? I mean, I'm trying to think. We did have a handful of fish that we doubled where it was a bluefin and a yellowfin, but they actually were way different in the water column. So the bluefin came off the bottom, and I know that we had been marking fish directly under the boat at 15 feet, and that's where the yellowfin came from. And the yellowfin actually that we got were much smaller, but they were almost like staying under the boat like albies at the time.
Now, did the yellowfin leave before the bluefin did, or kind of the same time?
I think that they probably were still out there. I gave up on that bite because I transitioned in September to giants. So, we had moved the boat to the start of the Bluefin tournament, Boston Bluefin Classic. So we had moved the boat up to the Cape to fish that, and then from there on out, it was giants until tog. I put the blinders on they had a great chunk bite for yellowfin and bluefin, and, I know that was good, but we were focused on mostly big game by that point.
So one last thing on the smaller tuna. So let's say weather came in, you haven't been out for 2 or 3 days. When you choose your spot, you go where it was last good. That's your most recent intel. They're not there. Where do you move from there? How do you then decide where to go? If you haven't been out for a couple days, your most recent intel is 3 days old.
You're sort of going to look for mammals or something to start on to work. It depends. So, if the weather was consistent, right? So let's say that we had like a bunch of days of east wind and it's blowing, that could drive the bait, further to the west. So I'll probably trend that way and kind of see how it shapes up, But it also helps to, obviously, in any offshore fishery, is working with a group of other captains or anglers. So, I got my friend Kevin from Blue Line Charters. He's coming out of Westerly. So then, and you got the Bacon brothers coming out of Point Judith. So, me being out of Newport. And then sometimes if Dom was working that way,
he was leaving from Falmouth a lot, too.
Yeah, so we're coming from all different directions, So it's good to check in. Everybody kind of come from a little bit different way. Like, I will tend to pull around from the east sometimes just to cover that stretch for everybody, just to see that way where, Dom has the far east, southeast kind of covered that way. And normally, with 4 of us, we can find something to work on within the day.
Yeah, I remember there was a stretch like that where I don't think anybody had been out for a couple days and we were going out, and your main advice was, you're going to see a spectacular marine mammal show. You're going to see a ton of whales. Go avoid that. You said find the small life.
Yeah, because the fish hadn't been on that big life. Yeah. They'd been on that small life. So, it's not that there weren't fish there, but very few, and most of the ones that we encountered in that crazy life show were bigger at that point. And they did. The small fish did come back into that life. So, check it out, but don't linger. You know what I mean? If you're not seeing the signs of life. Did you linger that day? Or
we lingered. So that's right. We did the where you would have moved. So we saw Dom that day. He stayed there for a little bit, and we kept trying, and then Dom took off to try somewhere else, where he eventually found them. And we just kind of kept hitting that area, and it did not adjust. And that's the difference between you and Dom and the guys who are out there every day and have to find these. If we didn't find fish, it just meant no fresh tuna for us. You didn't find fish, disappointed clients.
Right.
So we, not as much at stake, but your guys' ability to pivot. The network, we had a network out there too, but we were way less likely to find the fish. Like our moves, you see how they move after the weather patterns. That's the nice thing about being out there, and then having the good instincts on top of it. Mm-hmm. But that's always my main question, because you always seem to be on them. And even after a couple of days, you find them and you piece it back together quickly. So that's why I wanted to ask, how
stringing your days together, right? It's like you just, at that point, you're fishing in a pond, and okay, I've been to this spot every day, and the wind blew this way. Well, the bait's going to go over there. You're just looking inside that box, because in reality, you can only cover so much water in a day anyway. So you have to keep it within that box, and hopefully everything stays there.
And that south of the vineyard area, that whole dump area, is kind of unique, where you can have boats coming from all the, like if you've got somebody coming from Falmouth, covering that whole area from the Claw all the way down to the dump. You've got somebody coming out of Newport. You've got somebody coming out of Watch Hill. That's a lot of ground you guys can cover to find where they are.
And then sometimes it feels like that's not enough, because you have, you've got good structure and water from basically, you're talking Cox's Ledge to the canyon. So there's your box, you know what I mean? And it just, but once they set up and kind of get staged in an area, and where the bait is, generally most of it sticks around within 30-40 miles of that.
So predominant bait last year, sand eels.
Tons of sand eels. Lots of squid, though, too, because you get a big sand eel bloom, then you're going to have squid, right? Because the squid are going to feed on it, whether it's going to be lollygo or helix.
We were out, and we did catch a yellowfin one day in, I think it was right when they first showed up, so end of June, and that fish was full of squid.
Right.
And we were out trolling a couple days before that, and our bluefin were all full of sand eels. I think it was squid and butterfish that the yellowfin had on it, or had in it.
It's super important to be able to fish like multiple days. It's one thing that
In anything.
You know, it gives you a huge leg up, because like there were days last year where the bite was moving in a very fixed direction from the morning of the day to the end of the day, and I could only imagine if like you're out there working a bite for 3 days, you know, that could be a big piece of that puzzle. If you're going to go 4 or 5 days of complete blackout because no one was able to fish, looking back over the last 3 or 4 days, it's like, all right, I found them a little further to the east each day. Might as well start, 4 days further.
Run beyond them
to the east and kind of, look there. Or
I'll always go back to the scene of the crime first, though.
Yeah.
You don't want to drive over them. And the good thing is, though, we don't get blacked out for that long. The real easy can get through some weather.
you must push the limits in that boat some.
Yeah, it has to be. Rough is one thing. If it's rough, but you can be effective in fishing, and you got to know the group too. Some guys are more seasoned, so it's like a little bit of chop or some rougher weather. They're fine on the boat. I don't have to worry about it. But then there's a point where if it's too rough and it's going to affect your technique, I don't want to go out and have rough and blank because you just couldn't even fish.
Yeah, there's weather you can't even fish them. I was talking more about your commercial giant days where it's like it's just me and my chosen buddy or two, and I'm gonna roll in this mess.
We pushed it a little bit further than that. Yeah, Bo and I for sure.
So how was the 2023 giant tuna fishing?
It's very good. It's excellent. Yeah, did well in the Cape. Did well back at home. So had no complaints.
How's the Cape giant fishery differ from your close to home?
It's the same. I mean, it's
the same type of structure, same type of
giant fishing.
Yeah,
and it's just I just do it the way I do it. I mean, it was nice to come back to the Cape and fish a tournament, and I made that decision because we had weather coming. So it looked like that during the tournament, Rhode Island was going to be blown out for possibly 2 days. So I had to make a call whether the guys on the Cape and up towards Gloucester. I mean, the tournament, you had guys fishing from Gloucester all the way to Rhode Island. So do I let them fish for 2 days while we don't fish for 2 days? So looking at the forecast, I had to make up my mind whether I was going to go or not. So then we just said, I'm going. And of course, the weather improved once we already had gotten up there, and then guys in Rhode Island were able to fish. I think they were able to fish the afternoon of the first day, and then they were to fish the rest of the tournament. But it was nice to come back to the Cape and be able to produce fish. And, it was just like we left it. It was awesome, And
you came back in December too, right?
I did, yep. On that crazy December bite. Yep, that was a good time.
It seemed the giant season was closed throughout November, the month of November, but then a little bit of quota opened up in December, and everybody was itching to get out there because it had been. You knew how many were around. There were lobstermen who were talking about the tuna following up their pots all throughout the month of November.
Yep, they were.
And then guys got out there. You got one in December, right?
I did, yep. Yeah. We got 2 fish in December. And then when we came up at Fish the Tournament, we got 2 fish for the tournament as well. Although inevitably we lost, we ended up finishing 3rd, and 2 Rhode Island fish had bumped us out. So, lost by 7 pounds.
Now, you were out with Earl in December, and you guys hooked a poor beagle. And then, didn't the poor beagle have like a giant bite mark out of it?
Yeah, something had bit the poor beagle. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't like it was a small poor beagle, but he had a good bite chunk missing.
Like a shark bite or like a killer whale bite or what?
I wouldn't know the difference, without really analyzing it. Whatever it was bigger than the poor beagle and hungry.
There were a lot of orcas around last year. There was Old Tom, who is the orca that kind of comes through every year. He's a loner. He hangs with a bunch of dolphins.
He eats dolphins.
And while eating them. It's kind of a precarious friendship, I guess, for the dolphins. But he showed up, and he was at the Regal Sword. A bunch of guys saw him this past year, Old Tom. But then which was really interesting. I know to the scientists, there was a pod, like I think they thought a family unit of orcas that was also spotted. That was a little bit further offshore, but that's. Have you ever seen a killer whale?
I have not.
What's the coolest thing you've seen on your offshore trips?
Oh man, I don't know. Everything's cool, from molas to basking sharks to, free jumping threshers are always cool when you see those.
I've never seen that in person, man. That's got to be so cool.
To acres of bluefin blasting bait. There's always something cool to see, Sometimes it's just the little things or the big things.
So one story we didn't really cover last time you were in here was the story of your biggest giant tuna. The one you had with Lou DeFusco and
the one that had Lou and Ralph and
you had an all-star crew on there.
I did, yeah.
And my favorite part of that story is when you went to harpoon it, man. Tell us that one there. So,
take it from the start. I want to hear this.
Don't skip to the
full
end,
story.
Look, it was nothing out of the ordinary. We were, on a drift. We were fishing some pogies. We had some decent fishing, in Cape Cod, and far floater that had been doing it all year. Kept that bait 40 feet. And it was the wind was blowing, but the tide was blowing against, so it's actually a slow drift, which was perfect. And the fish was just an asshole. It was a big fish. So we had Ralph, and I had been using these prototype rods. It's the Daedalus blank that Jigging World makes. So, and Ralph had wrapped them up. And, obviously standard giant fight. We're fighting it for a while. And now we have the fish pretty much down and dirty, and we're at like 2.5 hours, and this thing just won't budge. So, I keep turning the drag up every 10 minutes to see if I can make them come up, and everyone's like, like, what are you doing? So then I put the boots to it, and then even that wasn't enough. So then Lou got on the rod, and I had to tell Lou, I was like, you have to start palming the spool. We need just a little bit pressure. I was like, look, connections are good, but we got to put more heat on this fish because he's not coming up. It's just, it was no gain. He'd come up a little and go down. It was the same. I'm watching the depth finder, and I can see him. He's just 80 feet, does not want to move from 80 feet. So when he starts palming the spool, I start hearing this weird beeping noise, and I'm like, what is this beeping noise? So I'm looking at my electronics, and then I realize Ralph had this like little watch, and it like monitors like your health and your heart. Well, his old ticker was going through the roof there as we're bending this thing, and we're putting the heat to it. So then finally, Lou had started to make some gains, and then I really told him, I was like, look, every time he comes around, you're gaining here, and you're losing on this part of the pinwheel, the rotation. I was like, when it comes to that, I want you to stick your hands in the spool and just hold on to that spool, and you cannot let any line off the reel. I was like, if you let line off the reel, I'm going to take you off the reel. And like he melted the gloves because he was put it on there. But, you got to trust your gear, that we got the fluorocarbon's good, it's strong, and I didn't see where he was hooked, but I felt like if he had been gut hooked at that point, we had so much heat, we would have ripped it out at some point. So it's like, we got to get him up. And then, he finally got the fish up. Then I was able to stick him, right close to the boat. So, and we got him. And it was, at the time, it was a decent sized fish. I think it was a little over 118 inches. So
massive, man.
Angry fish.
They're all built a little different. It's wild.
Was that the story you wanted to hear, or was it the one where the rod broke and I threw it over the rainbow harpoon shot?
I will hear whatever story you want to tell, man. I would love to hear that.
That sounds like a good one.
I was thinking of the one you just described, the one with Lou putting his hand on the spool, and then you went to go throw the harpoon initially, but the fish was so big that you misjudged how far it was, and you kind of did like a check, like you held the throw.
I check swinged, because I went to throw it, and as I was pushing down, and actually you could see it in the video. I can send you the video, but I realized as I was throwing it and I have it down, and I try not to let go to the last second, so I have it and I always hold it from the back. I'm not a javelin guy. I like to have it right from the back so I can push all the way through. And as I was throwing it, once the harpoon entered the water, I could see the tip of the harpoon, and I realized I had misjudged the distance and it was too far, so I pulled it out. I stopped and pulled it back out, and I was like, look, I could tell at that point I saw the hook. Right, the Mutu's in the latch. It's not going anywhere. Don't freak out. Just get one more turn, and then just poke it nice and easy. No need to freak out there. I didn't. If the hook had been, buried down below, I would have been ready to chuck that thing from anywhere. But
Because it could have come out at any
could have
minute.
come out at any second, or parked the line. I mean, we've had fish, another 118-inch fish. When I stuck it, this fish was an animal. I mean, this was the craziest thing. It stayed on the surface the whole fight, and this is a different fish, so that we had, and this is actually a funny story in its own right. So the fish stayed on the surface the whole fight. It is just will not sound. It's swimming away from us. So what I would do is I would come along and I'd back up to it, and I could get back. Every time I got within 30 yards of the fish, it would actually go all the way towards my starboard side bow, whoop around, and would charge the boat directly, black back, at the boat. Did the same exact thing 3 times. So finally I'm like, I'm going to take a shot. So then I had the harpoon, and I set it up right by the helm, and I'm doing the same thing. And then he veers off, and I'm like, he's going to do the same exact thing again. So I just kicked it back a little bit, grabbed the harpoon, and he did, and he turned, and he came black back, and I just chucked it, got him right in the head. Fish goes under the boat. We were able to get it, so we didn't run over the line. And then as we came tight to him again, he came to the surface and shook his head so violently and just chafed the leader instantly.
So just had him on the dart line.
Had him on the dart line, and I think, dude, we chased this thing to Gloucester, and then eventually he died on the dart line. But he did not go down. In fact, at one point we had gathered the dart line in, and I didn't know how well I got him, so we were pretty easy on the dart line. And we snuck up next to him, and he's just under the water swimming with the harpoon, and his head just like nothing happened. I'm like, I don't think this thing's ever gonna die. I was like, so we started to rig up a second harpoon, and then he slowed down, and then we were able to get the fish.
That's crazy.
So,
family owned and operated for over 65 years, AFCO represents unparalleled quality, performance, and reliability when it counts most. From inventing the roller guide to introducing the world's first pair of true fishing shorts, which are some of the most comfortable shorts you'll ever own, by the way. AFCO not only delivers products proven to perform on the water, but are true leaders of conservation as well. Their pledge to protect and conserve has 10% of your AFCO purchases going directly to supporting conservation initiatives. Beyond their fishing shorts, a couple of my personal favorites are the Barricade Elite bibs and jacket, as well as their line of Reaper sweatshirts, pullovers, and jackets. Check them out at afco.com. AFCO, any fish, any water. Do you believe in kind of like an expiration date on a fight? Like my old man, his 3-hour mark was when he started really getting...
I'm always watching it, It depends on what the fish's behavior is. Depend if I can mark him on the sonar, if I know where he's hooked, or you just put the boots to him when you think you can. Earlier the better sometimes. Sometimes you can't, depends on if something happens and, did my line get wrapped around a pot? Now I can't put pressure till I get past this certain point. Just all by feel, I guess. It's just instinct, kind of. It happens that way.
Now, when it comes to giant tuna bait, what's your hierarchy of baits? If you can't get this, you get this. If you can't get that, you get that.
It's hard to beat bluefish just because when they eat bluefish, it can be spectacular. I've had cool pogie bites where they come on the surface, but a bluefish's will to live is so strong that it will come airborne with, a 12-0 Super Mutu in its back, and the tuna wants to kill that thing, and that will come airborne. We got some of the best bite footage this year where I was more conscious now to pick up my phone, or luckily if I had Earl.
Yeah.
Earl.
We posted one that Earl shot.
Earl on board. He's he's very good about picking up the phone, where sometimes I'm in the moment, which is good to be in the moment, and just have everything happen around you. But it was nice to look back on that bite, and, and that was a day where the season had been closed, so that was a catch and release day. But we had all that east wind, and I needed to find fish because I had clients the next day, and I hadn't been out. So there was a small window to get out for a few hours after the morning, and I was like, look, I got to take this time to scout. Like, I can't, these are good clients. I got to burn some fuel for these guys and at least make sure we have the best chance possible. And I just, started milling around, looking for birds, just kind of doing this zigzag pattern from where we had the fish previously, giants previously. It ended up taking me about, I want to say, like 8.5 miles further to the east is where we ended up finding it. And it was the same thing. It was just all of a sudden 2 little subtle slicks I saw pop up, and I saw a couple of seagulls sitting down, and that we had schools of bunker is what was driving the fish. So the bunker and the gulls were kind of going hand in hand, and if you could find that, normally you would find the bluefin. And I was like, all right, we don't have much time. Let's just put a bait out and make one drift, and that's all it took. One drift, found him.
Now, do you think that I know the video you're talking about? Earl shot it. One of the funniest things Earl said, he goes, he sent it to me. We posted it on the Waters Instagram. And he said, he's like, I was in the middle of eating a Snickers bar. So like when he's like, oh my God, it sounds like you can hear he's got his mouth.
Yep.
But that had to be 2 fish, right?
It depends. I don't know. Like, I've watched it and wondered if it was 2 fish or 1 fish. I mean, he misses it, and I had actually I bridled the bluefish that day because the drift was extremely fast. So I didn't want, he had to pull him from the nose, couldn't just pull him from the back. And he hits it, and it goes flopping out. He sends it into the stratosphere, but they can turn so well. I mean, I really think that could have been the same fish, because when he comes back, he has it, and he grabs it, and I saw the balloon jerk, but then he slowed down, and it wasn't like he kept that same momentum. Then the balloon just started going steadily away, and I was like, we're already, like, you could tell we were on, like... Because
I think you were asking, at some point, one of you guys in the video goes, does he have it? Like, oh, he's got it. And then you hear the reel start to click. Mm-hmm. But you're right, yeah, he did, it slowed down after
slowed down, yeah. He smashed it. Once he caught it, then he was like, no, I got it. All
no
right.
reason to keep sprinting if you get...
So bluefish is the top bait, and we've had a couple good bluefish years in a row, so it's been pretty reliable for you to get your hands on.
And pogies are good, mackerel's good. I mean, look, a lot of it's going to depend on the area you're fishing and what forage is available. Like when I came up in December, I didn't bring bluefish with me, right? I just went up on the bank, we fished mackerel and herring, because that's what was available. So that comes into play. I mean, sometimes even just trolling some ballyhoo. I mean, it's amazing how effective that is, and we don't do it as much.
Nobody seems to, I don't want to say nobody, but trolling for giants seems to be a...
there was a season up here on the Cape where, a lot of guys were catching fish out east in like this 83-inch class. I'm pretty sure like Cullen from Cape Star, Dom, those guys had all been on them out further to the east. And then I had been hanging out with Scott Sinclair, who, he worked for Castafari, and he really was like, dude, let's troll ballyhoo. And I was like, all right, let's go. And we put time in, and it was effective. We caught plenty of giants. It seemed to, for me, it was a better approach on the half-beak fish than trying to run them down, because I'm not going to in a down east boat. I mean, sometimes I'm in the right situation, and if they're feeding in a certain way, I can get to them. But I was way more effective trolling ballyhoo when they were eating half beaks, and we actually were able to put a couple giants across the deck fishing that way. And then you go down to the Carolina, and that's all they do, pull the hoos, and they catch. So it's one of the things. Maybe I always say I want to experiment and try this and that, but sometimes it's hard to experiment when you know what's producing, and stick to the tried and true. Even though I know it would work.
That's one of the things I was going to ask you. Are there any kind of big Rob Taylor experiments like on the horizon for 2024 that you're like, you know what, I had this idea, I want to give this a shot, or I want to see if I can whatever.
I really want to utilize live imaging more in giant fishing and or chunking, right? I mean, how cool would it be just to put it and just being able to see my bluefish swimming around? And that's just one of those things where you'd keep checking it, like you'd be glued in it, so it gives that little added element of excitement, So I'm working on a mount that I can have it, so instead of just off the transom, but just have it off to the side.
What do you think you could learn from it?
I mean, one thing is I'll know whether it's a shark or a tuna.
Yeah.
Because you can see that. So, on days when you don't have a lot of bait, then maybe if you see a shark sniffing around your bluefish, you just casually bring them in for a little bit. And then I just want to watch how they take it. How do they approach it? What is happening out there? I mean, you could tell when they smashed on the surface, that's great. But sometimes when it's just a bob or down bite, did he swim by it first and then approach from a different angle? Like, there's a lot of things I think you could learn from doing that. And then how cool would it be? I mean, you know how it is with ice fishing with Mega Live. You can watch your jig. How cool would it be to just know with live imaging at what depth the chunks are disappearing and when those fish are coming up?
Yeah.
And then seeing how they react to your hook bait. You'll know. You can put your hook bait down. If they come up and sniff it and they don't like it, then maybe I got to figure something out and change it. You know, it'd be pretty cool to see that.
I mean, even with the traditional 2D imaging, you can dial it enough where you knew the attitude of the tuna. On the trip we were out there, you could tell by the angle of the mark. You're like, okay, he's tipped up toward my jig.
More
he's coming
engaged.
at it.
Correct.
You know, that's an aggressive fish. That's a fish that's going up and down fast.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to eat, or as opposed to one where he's just kind of cruising. You could tell the attitude of that just from those marks, but that comes from a lot of experience of watching the.
Yeah, just staring at the matrix all day long, every day.
All right, I've got one last question for you. Cheech might have a couple more. Let's say you've got a good clients, you've been fishing with them for years. They're coming up and they're like, Captain, it's your choice. But everything's good right now. The giant tuna fishing's great, but it's a catch and release giant tuna day. I'll throw that in there. Jigging for the smaller tuna is very good. Striped bass fishing's tremendous. Big togger biting. What are you doing? What's your day look like there?
We're tuna fishing because if it's catch and release giants and there's small fish firing, we can do both.
Let's go.
Well, we're going to burn your arms out on the small fish, and then I'll let you rest up, and then we're going to go hang a big one either. And it depends on, I mean, if they're not too big and we have 80-inch class fish, we can do that on the spinning gear, depending on how that pans out. Like we were able to do that this year, or last year, 2023, where catch some small ones and then, all right, let's go vertical jig some 80-inch class fish. Whereas, you know, if they're real big, maybe we'll try to burn you out in the 130s. I think that's a cool day. Seeing put a tag in a big one and take a small one home to eat, and then tag some small ones too.
That's a dream day, man. Mm-hmm. I also lied. I had one more question. Shark fishing.
Yes.
You getting a lot of call for that now?
We still do shark fish. Yep.
Yeah. What's is it waning? Is it more is it getting more popular? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's staying the same.
Yeah.
You know. But it's one of those things where, I mean, we'll go shark fishing and then it could turn into a tuna trip too, because it's very hard to pass up, you know, when you have tuna around. But I mean, you know, we try to catch and release makos when we can. You know, we tag them, so there's a good amount of tagging effort, and you know, I mean, it still is popular. I mean, because we do have threshers. I mean, a mako is just one of those things, and threshers for that matter. It's like, the amount of air they get after being hooked is a sight to behold. You know what I mean? It's like, once you see it, you want to see it all the time.
Oh,
you know, I mean, it's the only fish that I've probably, you know, the highest jumping fish I've ever seen hooked. I mean, we've hooked makos that I swear they clear 20 feet, you know, backflipping.
It's incredible.
And it seemed this year there seemed to be a little bit more makos being reported. For the first time in a long time, it feels like guys were running into makos a little bit more. And we have had, you know, the fishery's been closed for a few years now. And
it is. I mean, you know, and I mean, I still haven't seen it back to, you know, like the heydays of, you know, when I was, you know, in my early years in college, and we would make it offshore. I felt like there were makos everywhere. But, you know, if it trends in the way it is, you know, maybe it'll get opened up sometime in the future. But I mean, it's one of those fish that even still is fun catch and release. You know what I mean? And it does well as far as releasing.
It's a big West Coast thing. Guys go out there, they target them with light tackle, the pups, and
Fly
even some
fish.
of the big ones, and then they let them go. It just that just hasn't seemed to catch on here. I think it'd be a lot tougher to catch one on the fly here. Not impossible, but.
Earl and Taylor Brown have been out there and done it. You know what I mean? It's just it's a sight thing. So, you know, you got to get that fish chummed in. But I mean, it's definitely possible. I mean, look at the one thing that's nice is if we have a tuna trip the day before and we get a bluefin, I'll take that rack and kind of grind down the rack and make whatever's left over. It makes the ultimate mako chum.
candy.
I mean, you put that in the water and then the oil slick. It's like they just come marching.
It's mako's cartwheeling is about as cool as it gets for aerials. Threshers, however, many of the ones that I've seen come out of the water, it looks like it's the first time that fish ever jumped. It's almost like just like frozen still.
It comes up and back down.
Yeah,
It's like a, whoa.
What am I can't believe I'm doing this. But the coolest one I ever saw was we were fluking in the shoals, and it was chasing bluefish, and it came launching out of the water, and it was still swimming in the air. And that was the first time a thresher didn't freeze in the air. And that was really cool because it just had all that tail just still wagging. It was badass.
Well, that's what it looks like on that video that you were in, where that day that we were giant fishing and we had all threshers before I had to make that move. And yeah, he just kind of
Yeah.
That was a fun day, man. I mean, we ended up hooking the giant and losing it at the end of the day, but the threshers, that was so cool. And they were all big ones.
Very.
And one gave you a little love tap on the
that hurt
chest.
when I was putting the tag at him. Yeah. Putting the satellite tag in him.
Whipped you with the tail.
Oh, he hit me good.
Yeah.
My pride didn't let me show it, but it stung.
Well, Rob, thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk fishing with you. It was an awesome weekend learning from the master jigging smallies.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good time, and more time fishing with Rob Taylor is a good thing. So let's plan the next adventure.
I'm just glad you haven't said double or nothing because I'm not up for that.
No, good. I've learned my lesson.
Maybe scale it down a little bit. Maybe mix it up. Give Jim a chance. Make it pick roll.
Hey, I tried to do double or nothing with Tristan on a bet that we had, and it was we had gone on a tagging trip, and so he didn't come on the second trip. But the biggest fish on the second trip was the same fish that I had tagged and beat him with a couple weeks previous.
That's just the game's rigged. The game's rigged when you fish against Captain Rob Taylor. That's just the proof right there. Rob, man, thanks for joining us again, man.
All right,
Let's go fishing.
that's what I'm saying.
Let's do it.